It's a new era at Sam Houston and Rice. Craven has been boots on the ground at both those colleges, checking in with the new coaches. We're going to start with Rice because that story came out today. Mm-hmm. Craven, you went to see Scott Abel and found out that, Rice hired him because they wanted a unique offense from a coach who also has experience winning at prestigious academic institutions. Mike Bloomgren, the old head coach, had been at Stanford before, which is a prestigious academic institution, but didn't run that funky offense like Abel's going to run.
Yeah, he's been at Washington and Lee. He's been at Davidson. And for those who don't know much about those two schools, they're very high academic schools, right? Like Washington and Lee, one of the top D3 schools academically. Davidson, probably the top academic school in the FCS ranks. So he checked a lot of boxes. Just on paper, Scott Abel was a guy who, I think Tommy and the guys at Rice wanted to go look at. But I think for him, it's about winning. He had a quote in the story where he's like, I'm here because I've won. It's not because of my coaching tree or who I'm attached to or, I've been in the NFL or coached for Saban or coached for Pete Carroll. He's just won everywhere he's been, and he's been a head coach since he was 27 years old. And then I think that'll ingratiate him in this state is he was a high school coach for a long time. 15 years he was a high school coach. He planned on being a high school coach his whole career. Then an opportunity came out. That he wanted to go do the college thing like 17, 18 years ago. So just a longtime head coach who's excited to go through Rice. And I'm excited to see the offense. Like, this is such an air raid state. Mm-hmm. Like, the Mike Leach influence is still here. You got Dykes at TCU. We can go down the list, right? But this is going to look different. This is going to be shotgun option. A lot like what Liberty runs with Jamie Chatwell. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun.
So new offense, but a lot of the same returning pieces from Bloomgren's tenure, not doing a whole roster overhaul. How do you think that's going to give them a bit of an advantage going into the season first year with Abel?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like, at Rice, you can't do it that way. Mm-hmm. you can't go find 40 guys in the transfer portal that you can pull into Rice. A lot of the players at Rice are there for other reasons than just football. So you don't want to run those guys out, right? And you don't want to go find outliers that can fit into your program. You're going to have to do it organically. You're going to have to do it through the high school route. He's recruited Texas a lot, so I think he's fine with that. But this year, I would imagine it doesn't look full bore Scotty Abel offense. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to square a peg, round hole it a little bit here, and do what he can with the roster. He said something along these lines that we'd have to look it up. New coaches over the last 4 or 5 years, it's probably been the least amount of roster turnover of any program in the country.
And you mentioned he has recruited Texas, but not a Texas guy by trade. How do you think he's acclimating to the Lone Star State? Because we saw in December, so in one day he goes to Buc-ee's for the first time. Right. Then he hires John Kay, the state champion head coach at Galena Park North Shore, who was the linebackers coach before. And I also saw he offered Cade Spradling and actually got Cade Spradling to commit. He was the star quarterback linebacker from Smithson Valley, and that's an offer. That's a Texas high school football fan offer right there. So how do you think he's acclimating?
Yeah, I think elevating John Kay to defensive coordinator and keeping a person that's so well respected and loved in this state and specifically in the Houston area was a great first step. I think his experience as a high school coach helps him a lot in this state. We've seen it with Joey McGuire. We've seen it with Jeff Traylor. There's like instant credibility there. You can speak their language. You know what it's like to be in a community and play with the guys that you have in that community and what that means to people around. And so I think he has a lot of advantages. He checks a lot of boxes in this state, but the only way you can do it is just to go everywhere. I was there a week and a half ago, and when we were done with the interview, he was waiting out traffic, and then he was driving to Dallas to go to Allen and a couple of the Duncanville and a couple of the places up here you have to stop. When he went to THSCA after he'd done Buc-ee's, he went to a couple Austin and San Antonio area high schools. So you just do it step by step. You just get on the ground, you start meeting the high school coaches, you start shaking the hands, and John Kay is a good Sherpa for how you have to kind of navigate those waters.
So what are still like the biggest offseason priorities you think for Rice? We were talking before we hit record. We don't really know who the quarterback's going to be. AJ Padgett, the Reedy alum, is still there. Does he fit in that shotgun triple option offense? What are some big offseason priorities you think they still need to find out?
I think it's all about roster. I think it's all about figuring out what you have, what you don't have. There will be a second spring window, and again, it's Rice. You're not going to be able to pull in 15, 16 guys, but maybe there's 4 or 5 guys out there you can identify that can come help at some spots that you need. So far, they've brought in mostly help in the trenches, some help in the secondary. But after spring ball, after these next few weeks of being in the weight room, they're going to know if they have a quarterback on roster that can run this offense, and if their option is going to be, do we go find somebody who can run this offense, or do we run a different kind of offense? They do some RPO stuff. They throw the ball around. It's not complete 1990s Nebraska stuff. But they do want to be a run team. I think like 7 of the last 10 years, like they've led the nation in rushing. So they want to run the football. They want to find somebody who can orchestrate that. But again, I don't think it looks exactly how they want it to in year one. It's going to be a slow burn for them. But the next step up is just continuing to learn what this roster is. He had 82 meetings his first day on the job. Like he's met with the roster. Running. I think he's gotten to know the guys on the roster. Now he needs to learn what they are as football players on the roster. And that's something you just can't do until the bullets start flying in spring.
So I don't know if this was the first time you talked to him in person or not, but probably the first extended sit-down talk with him. What was kind of your biggest impression of him as a guy and a personality?
He's a confident dude. He's the youngest of 3 brothers who grew up on a dairy farm in Pennsylvania. He was the starting quarterback, shooting guard, and catcher on his high school teams, and so
decent.
He's used to having the ball. I think he likes that. I think he likes the spotlight. Kind of has some Willie Fritz to him in this way, in that he's kind of, he conquered the high school in Pennsylvania, right? He was state champion. He could have just won a bunch of state championships. He was at one of the premier high schools there. Then he gets to D3 and he does really well there. He gets to FCS. He does really well there. I think there's this sense of, can I go do it at this next level? He's 55 years old. Like, hey, this is going to be my final stop. Let's go prove that this option can work at places outside of the FCS and D3. So he feels like a confident guy. He played Major League Baseball for a couple years. He was drafted by the Royals. Just a big sports dude who, I think is going to fit in well within the state, and we'll see if it turns into success.
So successful first stop for you, Craven, at Rice, and then you also took a trip pretty close by to Sam Houston, the Conference USA. They said goodbye to K.C. Keeler, obviously not a guy who was fired, but took the Temple job after a 9-3 year, remarkable year at Sam Houston. They replaced him with Phil Longo, who was the offensive coordinator from 2014 to 2016. Had a lot of friends near Huntsville, likes to vacation at Lake Conroe, knows the donors and the athletic director, and they're going to bring him back this time as a head coach. What was your biggest impression sitting down with Phil Longo?
He's a serious guy.
Okay, so we got confident and serious.
Right? Phil's pretty much just about the football.
That's that jersey in him.
And I've known Longo because I'm obsessed with the Mike Leach tree. I'm an air raid guy. I was in high school from 99 to 03, right? So like everybody started running the air raid. It's just an offense that's really changed the trajectory of football in the state and what it is. We saw the 2 quarterbacks at the Super Bowl, two top picks in the NFL draft from the quarterback position are going to be Texas. So I've known Longo and known about Longo because of that tree. In like 96, 97, he said he went to a camp at Kentucky when Hal Mummy got there and just slept in his car and listened to Mike Leach talk about football for 3 days and just became an air raid guy. So you can imagine what the interview was mostly about when him and I were sitting there talking. And I think Sam Houston knew with the obstacles ahead of them, they are still trying to transition to an FBS program monetarily behind the scenes. They are redoing, half of their stadium, and they are likely not going to play at Bauer Stadium in 2025. They needed a familiar face who understood those challenges, wouldn't bail at the first sign of a red flag. And I think it helped Longo a lot that he knew Bobby Williams, that he knew those donors, and he had stayed in touch over the last 7-8 years since he had moved on from Sam Houston. He hasn't really been a head coach at this level before. He was a head coach for a couple years at LaSalle, but that was a long time ago. Mostly been a play caller, going to call plays at Sam Houston. But they are starting from scratch. Like this is a complete, we just talked about Rice and having 82 meetings and keeping most of that roster and trying to build it with the guys who were already there. Sam Houston's starting over, basically a real year one as an FBS program. And I think that's the challenges up against Phil.
So the air raid offense he coordinated at Ole Miss, North Carolina, most recently Wisconsin. We talked before we started recording, and I don't think this is unfair to say, like, Phil Longo probably doesn't get this job if not for the familiarity he has at Sam Houston. But why could Longo be a really successful hire, you think, for Sam Houston?
Because of the state he's going to be in. You will find a dearth of quarterback. Like you can find the guys to run that system in college in this state. There's wide receivers everywhere. There's quarterbacks that can run it. He just got a transfer that he recruited from the Woodlands. to come back.
Mabry Matower,
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Yeah, and so he's going to be able to find quarterbacks. He's going to be able to find receivers, and he proved he can put an offense in Huntsville that puts up a lot of points. He knows the lay of the land. He knows his bosses. He knows his donors. He knows the talent. He knows the high schools around him. He told me there's 2 states that he doesn't need a GPS to get to high schools in. One is New Jersey, which is where he's from, and the other one is Texas, because he's recruited here so much. Because when he was becoming a Mike Leach disciple, he'd go to Lubbock. He would come into the state all the time for coaching clinics and to get to know the high school coaching and recruiting. So I think his familiarity and the system he runs lends itself to success in the state.
So you mentioned that Scott Abel at Rice was taking 82 meetings his first day. Did you sense that same sense of urgency from Longo?
I don't think it was about keeping as much of his same roster, because I think the difference is Mike Bloomgren got fired in the middle of the season to where they could get Abel there by early signing period. Mm-hmm. His introductory press conference was like the 19th or 20th or something. He was already in place. He was already recruiting. He was already keeping his players out of the transfer portal. There was 18 or so days between Casey Keeler leaving for Temple and Phil Longo getting that job. And in those 18 days, every single day they were getting worse as a program because they were losing another player or two to the portal. And so by the time Longo got there,
the entire defense was gone.
There wasn't 82 meetings to be had, right? He would have had to meet with some just students and stuff.
Uh-huh.
There wasn't 82 football players on the roster to meet with. And so I think his challenge is heavier, at least in year one, because of the stadium stuff, because of just the flux, but also because he was hired later. And in college football now, the longer that these players can get into the portal, the worse you're going to be in year one.
So I know this is an unfair question to ask, but what is his biggest offseason priority other than all of them at Sam Houston right now?
Yeah.
It's just transition, guys. It's a transition right now.
Yeah.
Still transition to FBS. Longtime head coach just left. Phil Longo has got a great offense. We know he can scheme up the offense, but as the head president of this program, what's he kind of need to do?
I think it's getting the staff right. The longer I do this, the more I realize that the main job of a head coach is to surround his football players with talent as well. Right? Like, we talk about the recruiting, but when you look at the head coaches that are successful, they hire really well. They don't have a lot of turnover. They get their coordinators right. They develop football players. I think for first-year head coaches, that can be a challenging deal. Like, do you hire a bunch of your friends that you've known forever? Do you go outside of your tree? Do those guys get poached after year one? We've seen Willie Fritz have to replace both coordinators, one by choice, one by getting left for more money. And so I think that's it for Phil Longo. Is you haven't been a head coach in a long time. You've only had to kind of lead one side of the football team. How do you go about putting together a defensive staff and recruiting those guys and kind of being the CEO of a program? There's typically a learning curve with that.
Any other fun nuggets from your sit down with Longo? I'm sure you knew Longo better than you knew Abel because he's from Sam Houston a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And I knew a lot more coaches that knew Phil Longo. That's the thing about Scott Abel is he's a little bit of an albatross in the state. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know a lot of the coaches here. A lot of the coaches don't know him here, and so it's a lot of meet and greet stuff where I think Longo can hit the ground running. The difference is Abel's roster is a little bit more intact. I think that gives him a little bit of a leg up in year one.
So that'll wrap it up for Craven's coaching stops that he took early in this winter.